Emily's hands trembled as she pulled open the drawer. She hadn't been looking for anything in particular, just some receipts Mark had told her to find. But tucked under a stack of papers half hidden, was a thick white envelope. Something about the way it was placed so carefully out of sight made her heart skip. She slipped it out, her breath catching in her throat. On the front, in bold black letters, was her name. Slowly she opened it, each second heavier than the last. Inside were several crisp sheets of paper, neatly clipped together. Her eyes scanned the first line, and the words stabbed through her like a knife. Petition for divorce. Her knees weakened, and she sank onto the edge of the bed. Divorce papers. Her name typed neatly across the top, like some cold transaction. They weren't signed yet, but the message was clear. Mark had been planning this, preparing for it. The room spun. For years, she had worked herself to exhaustion, supporting him, standing by him, believing they were in this life together. And now, without a word, he was getting ready to walk away. Emily pressed the papers against her chest, as if holding them closer would change what they said. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. Why hadn't he told her? How long had this been going on? She thought of his late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way he had been pulling away from her for months. No, years. She had told herself it was stress, business, life. But this was planned, calculated. Her mouth went dry, her body stiff with shock. Fear slid in, sharp and heavy. What would happen to the children? What would happen to her? She knew Mark. He was clever, charming in public, but ruthless when it came to getting what he wanted. If he was hiding this, what else had he already done behind her back? Emily forced herself to breathe, slow and steady, but tears burned in her eyes. She thought of the long hours at the hospital, the times she had skipped meals and sleep so Mark could chase his business dreams. She had believed in him, carried the weight of their family on her shoulders, and still he had been plotting to discard her. The betrayal cut deeper than she could bear. She placed the papers back into the envelope, her fingers trembling. She wanted to scream, to tear them apart, to throw them in his face. But her body refused to move. It was as if the air itself had turned to stone around her. Then slowly something inside her shifted. Beneath the pain, beneath the fear, a hard edge of steel rose in her chest. Emily wiped her tears roughly and sat straighter. The man she had trusted, the man she had given her life to, thought he could end her story in silence. He thought he could prepare her ruin in secret, then throw her away when it suited him. She stared at the envelope one last time, her jaw tightening. If he thinks he can throw me away like trash, he doesn't know who I am. Emily had always been the kind of woman who put others before herself. She worked as a nurse, a job that demanded long hours and endless patience. Many nights, she stayed at the hospital for double shifts, caring for strangers while her own body begged for rest. She told herself it was worth it, not just because she loved helping people, but because the extra money kept her family afloat. When she married Mark in her early 20s, she believed they were a team. He had dreams of starting his own business, and she was proud to support him. Back then, she imagined they would build a life together, side by side, hand in hand. So while he chased ideas, Emily picked up more hours. She paid the bills, kept food on the table, and made sure their children had what they needed. Every sacrifice she made felt like an investment in their future. But years passed, and the man she once adored began to change. Or maybe, she thought bitterly, he had been that way all along, and she had been too blinded by love to see it. Mark was charming in public, the kind of man who smiled easily and knew how to win people over. At dinners, parties, or even casual outings, he played the role of a devoted husband. People often told Emily how lucky she was to have him. She would smile politely, though inside she wondered if anyone would believe her if she told them the truth. Because behind closed doors, Mark was cold. At home, his words were sharp and cutting. He mocked her exhaustion, laughed at her dreams, and reminded her that the money she made was barely enough. He kept control of their finances, never letting her see the full picture. Whenever she asked, he would dismiss her with a smile that felt more like a warning than comfort. "Don't worry about it, Emily," he would say. "I've got it handled." But she knew she was being shut out. The distance between them grew like a wall she could never climb. At first, she tried to fight it. She planned small surprises, tried to spark conversations, and searched for signs of the man she had married. But Mark brushed her off, Too busy, too tired, too uninterested. Eventually, Emily stopped trying. They had 2 children, teenagers now, 1 boy and 1 girl. They were the reason Emily kept pushing forward even when her heart was heavy. But even with them, she felt the weight of Mark's control. He often used her long hours against her, whispering to the kids that their mother cared more about work than family. It stung, but Emily swallowed the pain. How could she explain to her children that she worked so hard because she loved them? Loneliness wrapped itself around her like a second skin. There were nights she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all her life would ever be. Once, she had dreamed of traveling, of writing, of living fully. Now she was a nurse, a wife, and a mother. But she was also invisible. The signs of betrayal had been there for a long time, though she tried to ignore them. Mark's late nights grew more frequent. He often returned home smelling of cologne that wasn't his. His phone became a secret he guarded carefully, always face down on the table, or locked away in his pocket. If it rang, he stepped outside to answer, his voice low and serious. When Emily asked, he waved her off with vague excuses about business or clients. Sometimes she caught him staring at her with a look she couldn't quite read, part annoyance, part detachment, as if he were already living a different life in his mind. Emily told herself it was just stress, that marriage was hard, that maybe things would get better if she held on a little longer. But deep down, she felt the cracks spreading wide, too deep to repair. She stayed because she felt trapped. Mark made sure she depended on him financially, even though she worked herself to the bone. She didn't know where their money went, didn't know what he had hidden. The thought of leaving terrified her. How would she provide for the children alone? Where would they go? And yet, every day she stayed, she felt herself shrinking a little more. The woman who once laughed easily and dreamed big was disappearing, replaced by someone who simply survived. Emily still wore her wedding ring, though sometimes she caught herself staring at it, wondering what it truly meant anymore. A promise? Or a chain? The nights grew colder, the silence louder, and as Mark's absences stretched longer, Emily began to wonder if she had already lost him, and if she had ever truly had him at all. Emily sat at the dining table with the envelope in her hand. Her heart was racing, but her face remained calm. She had practiced this moment in her mind all night, though nothing could fully prepare her for it. When Mark walked in, loosening his tie and setting down his briefcase, she waited for him to settle. Then, without raising her voice, she slid the envelope across the table. "I found these," she said quietly. Mark glanced at the envelope, then at her. For a split second, she thought he might deny it, but instead, a slow smirk spread across his face, cold and sharp. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you finally found them." Emily's chest tightened. "You've been planning this?" "Without saying a word to me." "I was waiting for the right time," Mark replied smoothly, as if he were talking about a business deal instead of the end of their marriage. "But since you've seen them, I'll make it clear. When I file, you'll walk away with nothing." His words landed like a slap. Emily blinked, trying to steady herself. "Nothing? After everything I've done for you? For this family?" Mark shrugged, his smirk never fading. "You've worked, yes. But I'm the one who built everything we have. The house, the business, the image. You'll get no share of that. And the children? They'll stay with me. Do you really think a judge will give custody to an unstable workaholic nurse who's never home?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Unstable," she whispered. "That's how I'll paint it," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "Always at the hospital, barely seeing your kids. Overworked, stressed, tired. It won't be hard to convince people you're unfit." She stared at him in disbelief. The man she had supported, the man she had sacrificed for, was now preparing to destroy her. He wasn't just leaving. He wanted to break her completely. That night, after Mark went to bed, Emily sat alone in the dark. Her body shook as silent tears streamed down her face. The betrayal was unbearable, but the fear was worse. He had planned this so carefully, moved money into accounts she didn't know about, built a case against her. How long had he been plotting? She covered her face with her hands, her sobs muffled in the empty living room. For a moment, she wanted to give up. The fight seemed impossible. He had power, charm, money, everything. And she had nothing but exhaustion. But then, a spark lit inside her. She remembered the years she had carried him, The time she had worked until her body gave out, the endless sacrifices she had made. And now he thought he could erase her, just like that? No. Emily wiped her tears. Her hands were still shaking, but her resolve grew stronger with every breath. If he wanted war, she would not sit and wait for him to destroy her. She would fight back. The next morning, Emily made a call to a colleague who knew someone in law. A week later, she sat nervously in a small office across from a woman in a navy blue suit, a lawyer, recommended through a friend of a friend. Emily explained everything, her voice cracking as she told the story. The lawyer listened carefully, then leaned forward. Emily, you still have a chance. But you must act quickly. If he's already moving money, you need to file first. Once you file, we can freeze his accounts before he hides more. That way, you'll have proof of what's been taken. Otherwise, by the time you go to court, it could all be gone. Emily swallowed hard. The thought of making the first move terrified her. For years, she had been the quiet one, the one who endured. But if she stayed quiet now, she would lose everything, her home, her children, her dignity. She nodded slowly, determination hardening her voice. Then I'll file first. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of strength. Mark thought he had trapped her, but he didn't know her completely. He didn't know what she was capable of when pushed to the edge. This time, she would not be the woman who simply endured. She would be the woman who fought back. Emily secretly gathered documents late at night, when everyone was asleep. Her hands trembled as she unlocked Mark's desk drawer. Searching through folders, she copied bank statements, business contracts, and receipts, slipping them carefully into her bag. Each page felt like a weapon, proof of his lies. She knew if Mark discovered what she was doing, his anger would be explosive. But she forced herself to keep going. At work, she was calm and professional. At home, she pretended nothing was wrong. Every morning she cooked breakfast for the kids, asked about their schoolwork, and smiled as though her heart wasn't breaking. Inside, though, she was full of fear and exhaustion. She couldn't tell them the truth yet, not until she was ready to fight. Mark, meanwhile, grew more arrogant. He walked around the house with a smug air, certain she was powerless. He stayed out later and later, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. He no longer cared to hide his phone calls. When Emily asked where he had been, he gave vague answers. Meetings, business deals, clients. Always with that mocking smile, as if daring her to challenge him. The children noticed the tension. Her son Daniel, 16, was growing restless and angry. One evening, when Emily returned from a late shift, he confronted her. "You're never here, Mom," he snapped. "Dad's always around, but you're too busy working. Do you even care?" Emily froze, her heart aching. She wanted to tell him the truth, but she couldn't. Instead, she whispered, "I'm doing all this for you. For both of you." Her daughter Lily, 14, overheard and quickly came to her defense. "Don't talk to Mom like that," she said fiercely. "She works hard because she loves us. Dad just sits around pretending he's the hero." The argument ended with slammed doors and silence. Emily went to bed that night full of guilt. She knew Mark had been planting seeds in their minds, trying to turn them against her. It was working. Still, she pushed forward. She met with her lawyer in secret, handing over the documents she had collected. Together, they built her case piece by piece. The plan was risky, but it was her only chance. Finally, the day came. Emily filed first. The papers were prepared, signed, and sent straight to Mark's office. She pictured him sitting at his desk, surrounded by his employees. When the courier arrived, the image gave her a strange mix of fear and satisfaction. That evening, when Mark came home, his fury shook the house. He slammed the front door so hard the walls rattled. His face was red with rage. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he shouted. "Having me served like some criminal in front of everyone? You've embarrassed me. You've ruined everything." Emily stood her ground, though her knees trembled. "You were planning to ruin me," she said quietly. "I had no choice." Mark stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. "You'll regret this, Emily. I'll destroy you. I'll take the kids, the house, everything. And when I'm done, no one will believe a word you say." True to his promise, he began a smear campaign. Friends who once admired Emily now looked at her with suspicion. Mark told them she was unstable, obsessed with work, neglectful of her children. Some neighbors whispered when she passed, others avoided her altogether. At family gatherings, his relatives sided with him, repeating his lies. Emily felt isolated, as though the world had turned against her. Nights were the hardest. After the children went to bed, she sat alone in the quiet house, staring at the walls, wondering if she had made a mistake. Maybe Mark really was too powerful. Maybe she couldn't win. But then she remembered his smirk, his cruel words about throwing her away with nothing. She remembered the years of sacrifice, the nights she worked until dawn to keep their family alive. And she remembered the lawyer's words. If you move quickly, you can stop him before he hides more. She held on to those memories like armor. Her children remained divided. Daniel grew colder, repeating things he had heard from Mark. Dad says you don't really care about us. That you only care about work. The words cut deep, but Emily refused to cry in front of him. One day, she said softly, you'll understand. Lily stayed close, often slipping into her mother's room late at night. Don't listen to him, she whispered. I know the truth. I see what you do for us. Emily would hug her tightly, holding back tears. Those moments gave her the strength to keep going. The house felt like a battlefield. Silent dinners, forced smiles, tension hanging in the air. Emily lived in constant fear of what Mark would do next. But even in the darkness, she clung to her determination. She had filed first. She had struck before he could destroy her. That single act gave her power she hadn't felt in years. Mark could threaten, shout, and spread lies. But Emily knew one thing for certain. The fight had begun, and she was not going to back down. The court battle began on a gray Monday morning. Emily sat at the long wooden table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt small in the large courtroom, her heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. Across from her sat Mark, looking sharp in his expensive suit. He was flanked by two high-priced lawyers who whispered in his ear and shuffled piles of papers. Mark glanced at Emily with a smug smile. The same smile he had worn at home so many times. To him, this was already won. But Emily's lawyer, a calm woman with sharp eyes, leaned close and whispered, "Don't worry. We're ready." The trial began. Mark's lawyers stood first, painting a picture of Emily as an unstable, overworked nurse who barely cared for her children. They spoke about her long hours, her absences at home, and even suggested she was unfit to be a mother. Mark sat back in his chair, nodding proudly as though the judge would swallow every word. When it was Emily's lawyer's turn, the atmosphere shifted. She rose slowly and began to speak with confidence. "Your Honor, the story Mr. Davis is trying to tell is incomplete. Today, we will show evidence that not only clears my client, but reveals a much darker truth." She handed over a stack of documents. The judge studied them, then nodded for her to continue. One by one, the lies unraveled. Bank statements showed hidden accounts Mark had kept secret. Business contracts proved he had shifted assets into other names, trying to keep them away from Emily. Then came the messages, emails and texts that revealed his affair with another woman. The courtroom grew tense as the words were read aloud, proof of his betrayal for all to hear. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smug smile fading. His lawyers whispered urgently, but there was little they could say. The evidence was clear. Finally, it was Emily's turn to speak. She rose slowly, her knees weak, but her voice, though soft, was steady. "For years," she began, "I believed in this marriage. I worked long hours as a nurse, sometimes double shifts, just to keep our family afloat. I paid bills, I supported Mark's business dreams, I carried the weight of this household. And yet, behind closed doors, I was treated as less than nothing. He controlled every dollar, every decision, and made me feel invisible in my own home." Her voice cracked, but she continued, "I am not perfect. Yes, I worked long hours. But I did it for my children. I did it so they would have food, clothes, and a safe home. I never abandoned them. I never stopped loving them. And I will not allow lies to erase the sacrifices I made." The courtroom was silent. Even Mark's lawyers stopped shuffling papers. Emily took a breath, tears glistening in her eyes, and sat back down. The judge leaned forward, his face stern. "Mr. Davis, the evidence against you is overwhelming. You attempted to hide assets, deceive this court, and discredit your wife with false claims. Furthermore, your infidelity and financial misconduct paint a clear picture of dishonesty and manipulation." Mark's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. but the judge raised a hand to silence him. "I have made my decision," the judge said firmly. "Custody of the children will go primarily to Mrs. Davis, as she has shown herself to be a stable and caring parent. Furthermore, due to the deceptive handling of finances, Mrs. Davis is awarded a large share of the marital assets. Mr. Davis, your behavior is unacceptable, and this court will not reward deceit." Emily gasped softly. Relief washed over her like a wave. She had dared to hope, but hearing the words felt like a miracle. Mark, on the other hand, looked as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. His face burned red, his hands clenched into fists. Around the courtroom, whispers began to spread. His carefully built reputation, the charming businessman, the respectable husband, was collapsing in front of everyone. When the session ended, Mark stormed out, his lawyers chasing after him. Emily remained seated for a moment, her body trembling. She had fought the hardest battle of her life, and against all odds, she had won. As she walked out of the courtroom, she felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was free. Emily moved into a modest new home with her children a few weeks after the court battle ended. The house was smaller than the one they had left behind, with creaky floors and paint that needed touching up, but to Emily it felt like a safe place. For the first time in years, she could breathe without fear of what Mark might say or do. Unpacking was slow, but she didn't mind. She and the kids worked together, turning the little house into something warm and theirs. Lily painted her room a soft yellow, filling it with posters and fairy lights. Daniel, though still a little distant, set up his desk and shelves with his books and music. Emily placed a few flowers on the kitchen windowsill, and smiled when the children laughed at how uneven the pot looked. Life wasn't easy. Money was tight, and Emily still worked long hours at the hospital. Some nights she came home so tired she could barely stand. But the difference was clear. There was no longer tension in the air, no cruel words waiting for her behind the door. The silence of this home was peaceful, not heavy. At first, Daniel struggled. He missed the bigger house and sometimes repeated things Mark had told him. "Dad says you ruined everything," he blurted one evening at dinner. The words stung, but Emily stayed calm. "I know it feels that way," she said gently, "but one day you'll understand why I had to fight." Over time, Daniel began to soften. He saw how hard his mother worked, how she never gave up on them, even when she was exhausted. He noticed the way Lily clung to Emily's side, always defending her, always trusting her. Slowly, he began to see his mother not as someone who broke their family, but as someone who saved it. One Saturday morning, he surprised her by fixing the old mailbox outside. "It looked bad," he muttered, embarrassed. Emily smiled, tears pricking her eyes. It wasn't just a mailbox. It was a sign that he was starting to come back to her. Their bond as a family grew stronger. They ate simple meals together, laughed at silly movies, and filled the house with small, ordinary moments that Emily had longed for. At night, when the children were asleep, Emily often sat by the window with a cup of tea. She thought about how close she had come to losing everything: her home, her children, her sense of self. If she had stayed quiet, Mark would have crushed her completely. But she hadn't. She had found courage she never knew she had, and it had saved her. For the first time in years, she also thought about herself. Dreams she had buried beneath duty began to rise again. She remembered how she once wanted to take writing classes, how she loved reading and telling stories. She thought about traveling, about seeing the world outside her routine of hospital walls and painful silence. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life. She signed up for a weekend course in creative writing, nervous but excited. She bought secondhand books and filled her nights with words and ideas. She even started writing in a journal again, something she hadn't done since she was a girl. Each page felt like a step toward the person she used to be, and the woman she was becoming. She wasn't naive. She knew the road ahead would not be smooth. There would be bills, struggles, and moments of doubt. But she had already faced the worst storm of her life and come out stronger. Now, as she stood in her small kitchen watching her children laugh over a board game, Emily realized something powerful. They didn't need a big house or Mark's false charm. What they needed was love, peace, and the strength to stand together. And that, she thought with a quiet smile, they finally had. Emily opened a fresh notebook and held a pen in her hand. It had been years since she last wrote in a journal. Back then, she used to fill pages with hopes and dreams, but slowly, life had taken those away. Tonight, though, she felt the need to put her thoughts into words. She began slowly, her handwriting shaky at first. I have been broken, hurt, and betrayed. I gave so much of myself to someone who only saw me as weak. For years, I believed I was small. I believed I had no power. But I was wrong. Tears slid down her cheeks as she wrote. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of release. She continued, her words flowing more easily. I survived the lies. I survived the fear. I fought for my children, and I fought for myself. And I won. Not just in court, but here inside my heart. I am still standing. She paused, pressing her pen gently against the paper. For so long, she had carried the weight of silence, swallowing her pain to keep peace. Now she could finally admit it all, out loud, or at least on the page. From the living room came the sound of laughter. Emily lifted her head and saw Daniel and Lily playing a game on the floor, teasing each other, their voices full of life. For months, their home had been filled with shouting, tension, and cold silence. But now the sound of joy filled the air. It was the sweetest sound Emily had ever heard. She smiled through her tears, setting the pen down. For the first time in years, she felt light, as if a heavy chain had been cut away. She closed the journal and whispered softly to herself, though the words were meant for her children too. We're free now. Her voice was quiet, but it carried all the strength of the battles she had fought. She wasn't just a nurse, or a mother, or a wife who had been discarded. She was a woman who had faced betrayal and chosen to rise. That night, as she turned off the lights and tucked her children into bed, Emily felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer scared her. She knew she could build a new life, one step at a time, with her children by her side. And in that small, modest home, Emily discovered the truth she had forgotten. Survival was not just about enduring pain. It was about finding the courage to live again. Hey friends! Thanks so much for sticking around till the end. Don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button for more. See you next time. Sparkles!